What if you could own your own dream home and be financially empowered when doing it by using good debt first? Hi, I'm Jared Krause. I am the co-host of the Property Powell Australia podcast, and in this episode, Sam and I chat to Stephen McClatchy, who is the founder and director of Loans Australia since 2002. Now, Stephen has been in the finance industry for over 7 years and has overseen more than $1 billion worth of mortgage settlements, which is just insane, and has also earned a place in the top 100 best mortgage brokers in Australia over the last 4 years. In this podcast episode, Sam and I and Stephen talk about why we're actually brought up to believe our main goal in life should be to own our own home, and how important it is for us to understand what sort of conditioning we've been through and set our own goals personally that can help us unlock so many psychological benefits, including owning our own home, but with some freedom. So we dive into some pros and cons of buying a home versus the pros and cons of rent vesting. We also share some examples of how much it costs to own your home and buy a home first versus renting in certain areas. We also break down what rent vesting can do for you. Stephen shares a great story about how he bought his first home, when and how. We also talk about borrowing capacity, the type of borrowing capacity you could miss out on that may be a huge opportunity cost for real wealth creation if you don't understand what types of property to buy when in your own journey. And we talk about the psychological benefits of owning a home and the psychological benefits of being financially stable and having freedom of choice, and how you can have both. We talk about delayed gratification. You've heard about this before, and how adopting this philosophy can give you more freedom and happiness than you may even have known or thought to be possible. So I share some experience, Stephen shares some experience, Sam does as well. There's so many nuggets in this episode, and I'm going to go on record to say that this could be one of our best podcast episodes. Now, before we get stuck in, of course, this is not the only way that we can help you for free. We have our How to Maximize Your Borrowing Capacity mini course. You can head to our website, propertypowers.au/resources to get that, to help you get a superior asset when acquiring a property. Let's dive in. Welcome to Property Pals, the podcast where we share everything around how to build a property portfolio, from researching areas, financing, structuring, buying, selling, and reinvesting to live a life of financial independence. As a disclaimer, any information shared by myself, Jared, Sam, and the Property Pals team is strictly general and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, and taxation advice from a qualified professional.
We are here once again with the lovely Stephen McClatchy. How are you, Stephen?
Fantastic, Sam and Jared. Looking forward to a good podcast today. It's a great topic.
Yeah, last time we spoke with you, Stephen, I think we got on a little bit of a tangent towards the end, and we thought this is an amazing topic we need to delve deeper into, which is rent vesting. I myself have a number of clients that constantly ask me that question, like, well, do we invest first, or do we go for that, that owner-occupier dream, but it's not our forever home? And there's a really good sort of examples that I try to help people with, and Stephen himself has definitely helped a lot of people through this journey in their finances. So yeah, it'd be good to get you on board and pick your brains about it, mate. So just can you explain a little bit to people about what rent vesting actually is?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, it's when you're looking to buy, let's say, your first property. And if you're rent vesting, it means that instead of living in that first property, you're actually going to rent it out and make some income. And there's decisions around why people do that. Obviously, our culture is not that. And we've been brought up to save up for the family home and get the white picket fence and the pets and the whole thing. That's what the dream is, I suppose, we're sold as a youngster. And most of our parents would have gone down that route, especially if the parents are 50, 60, 70, they would have done that. But because of the economy and the way things go and the way the whole world's going, as more and more people now are actually renting because they can't afford really where they want to live. or it might be a struggle that people now are looking at alternative ways of living, and even building wealth as well. It's not just building wealth; it's also being able to have a reasonable lifestyle and not just have this noose around your neck you feel like for 35 years, or even, well, that's what people don't really realise now, that the average mortgage length is going up to 40 years. We've got plenty of loans now which are 40 years in term. So just imagine you manage to save a bit of money of your first job and you get in your first home and you're 25 or 30 years old, and all of a sudden 40 years later you're nearly 70, and you've just paid it off. And that's the reality for some people, that their whole life, statistically in Australia now, that there's about nearly 35% of people have a mortgage in their home in retirement, which is horrendous. And that's why the government continues to try and push our retirement age further and further out, because people just aren't even paying off their home before they retire.
That's crazy. I'm so glad. I was talking about this last night at dinner with some friends around like what the pension is for Australia. Will 30-year-olds be able to get the pension when they do get to retirement age, and then also how much do they get, and do they still have a mortgage? And you mentioning a couple of things there, Stephen, put in a very amazing way, in terms of like it's a part of our culture and part of like what we are sort of fed to believe, that owning a home is like a dream, and we should all have a dream home one day, or get ready to get a dream home and then get put into what we call a mortgage. And if you look up the definition of what mortgage actually is in the dictionary, it's quite morbid. I did this many years ago when I was like, do I want to settle down? Do I want to get a mortgage and all that sort of stuff? And looking like, is this actually what I think it is? And it's a part of our, who knows why we're conditioned this way, or
I've got an idea, mate.
Yeah. I think the banks might have an agenda, but it is an interesting one, and this is why we have this education here. Is sort of like you said, Stephen, before we opened it up last time we chatted on the pod, is like you got so much data around it. But I think one of the key components is us understanding and creating our own vision and our own goals based on what we feel is right for us, not based on what society has sort of touted in movies and content and what has been led to believe the dream. Because literally there are some people that I believe are like, I just want to own a home because it makes them feel good, and there's some pros and cons to this. But it depends on what you really want, right? Like some people listening to the pod are like, well, a home would be nice. Of course I want a home, but at the same time, like money is really important to me, and it might be more important on the scale than owning a home. So I guess, what do you guys have to say about the goal setting for this? Like,
I think people don't really know what they want, because they're conditioned a certain way, and people don't really think through what it actually means to own a home and what it actually means to actually rent. Like actually getting your head around the fact that you might be a renter your whole life is something that most people have never considered. What that really means. Even though lots of other cultures are like that, they actually rent their whole life. Our culture is not the norm. Like America is similar to us. They're going through the same issues we are, that a very high majority of people, and increasing, are moving into rental, and they're ending up in retirement with a mortgage, a lot of people. So they're having the same cultural problems, and we're sort of now going through that shift, because for some people it's a massive hit to their ego and just their being, that they may not be a property owner, and they may not be able to afford to live where they grew up. For a lot of people, that's a real psychological blow, that they've lived in a certain area for 30 years and they realise that they cannot afford to live in that area and they have to move somewhere completely different. There are a lot of issues. And then I think it comes down to then looking at the financial side of things, that people do need education around what it means to own a mortgage and what the responsibilities are. And people don't realise, for most people, when they get a mortgage, the repayment they make is generally significantly more than the rent they've been paying. And some people have moved out of their home. Some people might have been living in a parent's rental property, paying less rent. They might have been in a share house with people. And now all of a sudden, they instead of paying $300 or $400 a week, they're paying $700, $1,000 a week. And they haven't really shifted their mindset to, and that's just the rent. And that's just the mortgage. That's not all the other things on top you've got to pay for it.
Yeah. Rates, water, maintenance, power, bills, craziness.
Yeah.
Well, Don't even add in there getting a couple of dogs or a cat and how much they cost.
Or furnishing it, or doing your maintenance on it, or your wife wanting that nice patio out the back. Before we jump a little bit more into it, like this is how I was conditioned through my mum's career-long school teacher, father tradesman, turned he was jack of all trades, went into real estate and all that, and then business owner at the end. But it was they were taught and conditioned because they saw that if you bought property, it would go up in value. So their mindset was always the best thing for our children is give them an education and then to push them into buying some type of property. And that I never thought to them to buy an investment property first off. It was always, well, everyone owner occupiers, like that's like in their circle was that sort of success level. And back in those days, like my parents actually moved out of Sydney and up to the Gold Coast, which is a more affordable region at the time, for a similar reason, but also lifestyle changes. But yeah, it was ingrained to me, and it was constantly like, when are you buying a house? When are you buying a house? And people are up against that, so they've got that conditioning through probably a few generations. And like I'm for the owner occupied. Don't get me wrong. Like it's like there's just thinking of it going, well, as Jared said, what's your bigger goals? Because 9 times out of 10, the first home you buy is not going to be the one that you spend the majority of your life in, and you're going to be upsizing and downsizing throughout the journey. And that's where, rent vesting has come about in the last few years, and rightfully so, in sort of my opinion. But it's case by case, right, Stephen?
Well, it definitely is. But I know you said people go up and down the property ladder throughout their life, but I find a lot of people actually try and get the dream home first.
I was about to mention this.
It's that's what they should be doing. They should be slowly moving their way up the ladder over time, and start off small and build up. But a lot of people I speak to, especially young professionals, and not even just young professionals, they're wanting the lifestyle property. They're wanting the highfalutin apartment or the nice house with a backyard they can renovate over time. So they're getting something right to the edge of their borrowing capacity pretty much first time. And look, their borrowing capacity might not get them the dream home, but it's getting something that they're right on the edge anyway. People don't understand what they can really afford, and like you said, their goals. Their goal is to own that property, get my own home, decorate it like their parents did. And look, I think most people have got that similar story where the parents have wanted to buy a home somewhere, but it's good. It's unusual in Australia for a lot of parents to move to get the better choice. So your parents actually did really well by doing that. It's most people just stick where they are and just move to a suburb, but they actually move states. In America, they've got that culture, but not so much in Australia.
Yeah, we're more like, let's complain about we can't afford where we want to live, and hopefully the government give us more money. Cynical.
Okay. I wonder if this actually is a benefit of what's happening in the world right now. Like you said, Stephen, people growing up for 20, 30 years in their hometown, and then it becoming too unaffordable to acquire a home to live in, and they're forced to rent because they do want to live where their friends and family are. I wonder if that's a benefit to them sort of looking at alternatives like rent vesting nowadays, and also with more and more people using buyer's agents to buy properties that aren't in the same location that they grew up in or lived in, or that they apparently know because they've lived there for so long. Being from the Gold Coast, Sam and I saw that it's like one of the highest cost of living in terms of like renting on the Gold Coast now in Australia. Yeah. And I feel for people that want to buy a home, and that's what their actual goal is, not based on societal conditioning, but that's actually what is right for them, and they want to buy that home but they can't now. But maybe it's a beneficial thing for them to go, all right, I now need to like work out how can I invest outside of the Gold Coast on these other assets that may be a bit smaller, that can allow me to eventually get to that dream home and have some delayed gratification, which
I like that word.
Allows. Yeah,
people have got to get that word in their head, in their vocabulary, because that's the word. If they understand that, then they'll be fine. The delayed gratification. Yeah.
So what are some pros and cons? I guess let's go through some pros and cons of buying a home, and then pros and cons of rent vesting after that, and I'm sure this delayed gratification will come up again.
Well, one of the pros of buying a home is personal satisfaction. I think it is psychologically, it's a massive thing for someone to see, get a picture outside their first home and it's theirs. That's their piece of dirt. So they've got to pay rates on for the rest of their life. They can decorate that, sometimes people grow up where, they mark their kids off if they go up in height on a little post in the house, and it brings all these memories that people have. And when you get old, you think back, this little Johnny ran around this backyard and had fun. And I speak to old clients that they're moving out of their home, and that's some of their fondest memories, that their family grew up multi-generations in this house. It doesn't even matter what the house is like. It's the fact it was theirs. They had birthday parties there. They had Christmases there. They had kids running around the backyard playing games, cops and robbers or whatever. So that lifestyle is a big thing. The culture, the family, it's a big reason why people have their own home, and it gives them stability, that they know forget whether they can afford it or not, but it gives them this stability. This is their home. There's no one's going to kick them out of it if they're paying their mortgage. It's their right. They get to, meet the neighbours, get this social aspect going in the community, where they might join the local sporting teams, might go to the local pub. It's a whole lifestyle that people feel great. It's a sense of being. So that, I think that's a massive thing, having this feeling that you're part of a community. So I think that is a big aspect of home ownership for sure. And obviously, when you're looking at financially, it's one of the biggest benefits that we can have financially is that if we sell our home, we're not at the moment paying capital gains tax. Now, that is a huge thing. Don't get me wrong, that is a massive consideration depending on where you're buying. And for some people, that is actually their retirement strategy, is basically to downsize in retirement into something they can afford and not have to pay that tax on the family home they might have had for 20, 30, 40 years. So that is a big consideration. For me also, some of the benefits of home ownership is having pets, quality of life, that you can have your own pets. You can have a menagerie of animals if you want. You can build an aquarium into the wall. You can do what you can have a pony out the back if you can fit it in. You can do all sorts of things. So again, that goes to the quality of life, and having kids with pets is a good way for them to learn how to look after other people. It's not just all about them. They've got to think of someone else, and about sharing and things like that. They're learning valuable things they should be knowing. So these are some of the basic tangible benefits of home ownership. There's obviously there's some downsides in terms of it. Owning a home, generally the mortgage is a lot more expensive than what the rent could be in most cases. The fact is also then you've got this massive mortgage that you have to pay off eventually at some stage, and you've got that for a very long period of time. And that long period of time that, 30 years ago you're in a 10-year mortgage, and then over time, because our income has not kept pace with the inflation in the economy, we're now out to 30 to 35 to 40-year home loans. And so people have got this massive interest bill that compounds hugely over that period of time, that instead of maybe paying, buying a $300,000 house and paying off $420,000 over that mortgage period, now they've got a $600,000 mortgage and paying, well over $1.2 million for it. So they're paying a lot more money that they've got to earn after tax dollars to try and maintain their house. And people don't really understand those numbers at all, of actually how much they've got to pay to keep the roof over their head and keep their existence going. And then the cost, not just of the mortgage, the actual cost of being in a house is very significant. We're not just talking about rates and general expense of the property, but people like to beautify their property. Like you said before, Sam, they might build a back porch. They might put a veranda on. They might put a new carport in. They might do new landscaping. They might want to put a pool in or a spa. They might want to add a third bedroom as you get more kids. They might want to, holy smoke, go up a level and build an extension. They might want to paint every 5 years or so. They might put new tapware or renovate a bathroom or a kitchen. And holy smokes, it costs a lot of money. I'm renovating a bathroom on one of my rentals. It's only a 1-bedroom unit, but it's 20,000 for a bathroom, 30,000 for a little kitchen. It's a lot of money for and that's just a little unit. It's not a big house. So all these things add up in your own little house that you've got to do, that if you're obviously a rental, which we'll get to, you don't have a lot of these costs. So a lot of costs. And also, if you don't get on with your neighbours, imagine you get into a dispute with your neighbour, and I've had plenty of clients have this problem. They get into a dispute, or the wrong people move into the neighbourhood, and all of a sudden there's dramas. What do? It's not as easy just to move to a rental property. You own that house. So are you going to sell your house? What are you going to do? There's lots of questions that come up.
There was another thing I'd jump in there, Stephen, with like going in with the, beautifying your own residence, and that's like, all power to you. But once you start painting, replacing the floors, and even say doing a kitchen up, because it's dated, the next mind goes to, now we want to get a new couch to match our new kitchen, and a rug, and that they're all things that are highly, I guess, depreciable over time, which is taking you further and further away from, I guess, the perceived goal of passive income or retirement.
Well, traditionally, and initially I started in the financial planning industry, a lot of people didn't even consider investing to their retirement until well in their 50s. That was the initial process, that when people start out, they got the home, they tried to pay it down over 20 or 30 years, so when they're sort of in their 50s, and then once they had that freed up income and the kids maybe finished school or nearabouts, that's when they started to invest for their retirement, when they've only got, I think we've lost Sam, when they've only got about, I'm still there, okay. When they've only got about 10 years to go until retirement. So they've only got 10 years to build some retirement nest egg, which is giving no time for compound interest at all. And people wonder why they've got a pretty cruddy retirement, because they've done it the complete wrong way. They've paid off an asset which really they have no intention of moving out of. If you speak to most people, they've got their home, they've paid it off over 30 odd years. They don't really want to downsize into a nursing home or some tiny unit. People don't want to do that. They're forced to do it because they can't maintain the property or the lifestyle that they've had for 30 years when they were working and earning income. But that's not what they want. They want to stay in their house, and they want to be carried out in the body bag when they cark it at 90. They don't want to leave. And so there's lots of pros and cons of doing that. And even my dad, he stayed in his house till he died at 92. And that's what he wanted. He was no way was he going to a nursing home, not a chance. And luckily he was able to not do that.
I think it's really hard. Like I can foresee and have some level of understanding of why people love a home and the psychological benefits of being in a home. Like I'm not a homeowner, but I can see like how psychologically beneficial and at ease it can make your maybe parasympathetic nervous system and your heart, and creating all these cherished memories. I think what's really hard is for us to quantify that and measure those things versus maybe data and analytics of finances. But the reality is, like why we share this, I guess, Stephen, is because people can have both. And in fact, once we start to share the data on the metrics of rent investing first and then buying a dream home, typically I believe those psychological benefits of becoming financial enough to buy a better dream home and then have that delayed gratification later, you could get even more psychological benefits from being also financial and having those things, but you're just delaying it a little bit versus like, I need to have this now when I'm 25.
Yeah. But imagine if you lived in an area which you couldn't afford to buy in. So you were living in your dream area from near the beginning. You live near the cafes that you want to go to, the night spots you want to go to, maybe in an area where you don't even need a car because the transport system's so good that you can not have a car and save yourself 12 or 13,000 a year. Instead, catch Ubers, catch public transport, because most people are working most of the day. They're not driving a car around for 80% of the day. They use the car 5% of its useful life, basically. So maybe in the first 10 years as you're building your lifestyle, that maybe when you need a car on the weekends, you can just hire a car or Uber if you want to go. But if you're living in areas close to your work or close to lifestyle because you're not owning the house, you may be renting the house in an area where you want to live. Who wants to really live an hour or 45 minutes from their work and have to travel 2 hours every day to go back and forwards to work and all the extra costs in the car and the time and the mental stuck in traffic and honk here and all this, and there's accidents all the time. You're sitting there in traffic. It's just the nightmare of that commuter lifestyle. Who wants that?
Absolutely.
It's a stress on your mental health too. I used to commute to Brisbane, car and train, and it was, as Jared knows, it wasn't the strongest time of my life mentally.
Yeah.
Well, I think you and I were in a similar boat, Sam. I spent 18 hours in the car per week commuting just to work, and then 70 hours on the tools, outside of that. So you've got 88 hours of committed to this thing that I just didn't like each week.
That's tough.
It's wild, but different story. Like, you're right, Sam. It's just like, and Stephen, like, I love the idea of renting in a location that you might not need a car. I also went down the road of, like, I just had a moped and I lived in Burleigh. Or Sam and I actually lived like literally across the road from each other. It was like a highway, but we used to wake up each morning and Sam would run to my place because it was on the way to the surf, and then we just go for a surf together. And then Sam used to work down the road and I used to work at home. So, and we were both renting at the time, and it was perfect. Like, I thought we were living the dream, Sam. What do you think?
Still am living the dream, mate. You're just in Bali, you're just living over there, and I'm living here.
Yeah, but you'll be here in 2 weeks' time anyway. So
yeah. But I'll be bringing my tribe of children, which is different. David, do you have any sort of numbers around it? Because to sort of help people paint that picture of, I guess, pros and cons.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little story first, and I'll show you some numbers. I don't
love it.
Are you able to share a screen or not really?
Yeah, we can share a screen. Yeah, if you go down the bottom there, you can click share screen.
To share? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll do that in a minute. I've got a couple of slides here. I'll show you. So I thought about this. I grew up in Sydney, I suppose an expensive area because you're in a Sydney. And I was thinking early on, what am I going to do? This is a long time ago where there wasn't a word called rentvesting around. And I decided, okay, I was, I suppose, fortunate because I was able to rent in one of my parents' properties and for a very affordable amount of rent, well below market rate. So I took advantage of that. As you do.
So you should.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a benefit of having that. And so I decided to go down the rentvesting, and I bought rental property. And I thought, this is pretty cool because it's not just me paying this property off. I've got a tenant in there who's paying rent. And then luckily, or not luckily, but it was what we call negatively geared. So there's a negative cash flow when you took into account depreciation and everything else. And so the government would pay me back some money each year as well to help maintain that property. And then I found out it wasn't a huge amount of money out of my pocket. It's just like a savings program, really. I thought of it that every week I contribute a certain amount of money to pay my property off. And lo and behold, next year when I got a valuation on it, it had gone up and I actually made some money as well. And early on, I thought, this is pretty cool. I don't have to live in the property. I wouldn't want to live in the property. It was in a Sydney, Ashfield, it's called, and people want to live there. It's near a train line. I bought that in, I think, 1997. I've still got it, and I've had maybe 2 weeks of rent not rented that whole time. It's been very desirable for people to rent. It was a great little buy, but it's all I could afford at the time. It was only 125,000. This little unit. Now it's worth a lot more than that.
I can imagine.
I found I got the bug, I suppose, that I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. And so I continued to do that. And I continued to buy properties because it wasn't just all my income going to afford it. It was, I had other people, the tenant and the government helping me do it. And I decided that I wanted to spend more of my personal income to build my wealth, and I continued to do that. And I didn't end up buying a home to live in until well down the track, until I think our oldest child was, probably 8 or something like that, or 9. We waited as long as we could, and then we bought a property that we could afford it then. A nice property, and unfortunately we're rebuilding it now, which costs a lot of money. But now you're not doing that when you're 25. You're doing that well down the track when you can afford to do these sort of things. And that worked very well for me, because then when I moved from Sydney down to Melbourne, we lived in probably one of the best suburbs in Melbourne called Brighton, and lived in a
Yep.
great property. We lived there when I relocated to Melbourne for 10 years. And this one property, the rent was tiny. The owner was awesome because we took long-term leases. It was amazing the amount of rent we paid where we were. It was just phenomenal, and just allowed us to continue to build properties and not worry about, we didn't have to renovate it. We didn't pay the rates, the body corporates. We did nothing. It was so cheap to live there in a phenomenal area and lifestyle, and allowed us to put a lot of our income into wealth.
Did you intentionally buy a couple of properties to then get yourself into a financial position to buy a home, and at the same time own a home that wasn't a complete liability that allowed you to continue acquiring more investment properties as well as owning a own home? Is that sort of like the formula that
Not really. So the initial intention wasn't, I wasn't there to buy a home. That wasn't my person. But when you get married, so you need to make sure both people are on the same page. And luckily my wife was. She understood what I'd been doing and why. And luckily we were together pretty early on. So she saw the whole thing happen and was part of it.
Right.
So she was on the mindset that she was quite happy to delay her gratification of owning her own home, even though her parents had gone down that path. But she saw where her parents were, and they were okay, but they weren't, phenomenally wealthy, but they'd done well for their situation in life. So she was willing to wait, and she waited a long time as well. But then we got, not the average house, and because we could afford it at that stage, but we didn't have to sell other properties to get that house. Where sometimes you have to make that decision. You might have to, depending on what sort of house. But that wasn't the overall goal. Wasn't to buy the home. The overall goal was financial freedom. Was building an asset base so it had income coming off it to replace your income and live a lifestyle. That was the overriding goal. It wasn't to have the dream home. The dream home concept came much later when it was evident it was more affordable that we could afford that and that we could have that lifestyle. Yes, we wanted somewhere nice for the kids to grow up, and we moved out of Melbourne. So instead of staying in the area we were, we moved 45 minutes south to the peninsula, south of Melbourne, where we could afford a much bigger house on much more land in a really nice area. And so we made that conscious decision. We bought a property which would have been 5 to 6 times the value if we stayed where we were. And it's like moving to the Gold Coast. Back then you could afford much more bang for your buck. And we decided instead of having a massive noose around our neck by having this mansion in Brighton, we moved to the peninsula where we have, a big house on what we wanted for 1/5 of the price.
Yeah, and you could keep going with other investments as well. That's really cool.
Oh, that's right. It wasn't holding us back. It was affordable at that stage, 25 years or so down the track from where we were initially. And that was just our decision. And that wasn't, I suppose, having the education that's now around about it. Now there's heaps of education and reasons. But I've thought about it a lot because we've got a lot of clients who have gone through the same struggles and concepts, and the amount of money and time it puts you back by owning a home first is huge. It's really a lot, and people just don't really understand the impact financially it's going to have on them. And also, people like to travel and do things, and when you've got your own home, you're stuck with it, unless you're open-minded and have people, sit in your home or rent it out when you're away traveling and things, which you can do pretty easily if you understand about that. But what I'll show you now is just a little example that I show some people. Let me just share my screen.
Yeah, while you're doing that, Stephen, congrats on what you've done. And it's so good that you are sharing this with people. Would love to see, like you said, people don't realize the financial impact it can have on not just an individual, but a family from owning a home, like going to buy a home too early. And I'd love to know like the data
Kids
and the
don't
stats
know.
on that versus
it's the parents.
Don't know. Yeah.
Kids don't know that you're owning or renting. They really don't. When we grew up, we had a nice house we were renting, and kids didn't know whether we owned it or not. We just lived there. Yes, okay, we didn't renovate it, we didn't put extensions on, all these things we didn't do, but they don't know that. So it's not as if people can't pretend they're buying a house because the kids want to live in a house they own. They know nothing about it. Kids will just have fun wherever they are. It's more the parents who have this concept of home ownership, not the kids don't have a concept of home ownership. It's a difference. I'll share my screen. I'll show you a couple of things. So should you own your own home or rent? So here's an example. This is a Melbourne example. Sorry, guys, you're on the Gold Coast, but so this.
Also, for people watching or listening, go to the YouTube video if you want to see the stats here, because we're sharing our screen.
Yes, I'll explain as we go along as well. So what I've got here is, should you own your own home or rent? So I've got an example of a house in a suburb called Berwick in Melbourne, which is a nice sort of outer southeast suburb that a lot of people like to live in. It's a bit more, one of the more salubrious suburbs in that part of Melbourne. The average house down there was about $870 for the standard sort of 3-bedroom home. And I've got here a mortgage value of $650,000 on this home. Now, when I looked at this, the median rental in that area, Berwick, to rent in there was $500 a week to rent a property, an average 3-bedroom home, which is $2,165 per month. So that we're looking at buying a home there, an average home, or renting an average property.
Yeah.
So we have a look at some of the numbers when I looked at this. Now, mortgage payment at 5.95, so that's cheap at the moment. So most people mortgages are probably 0.5% higher than that at the moment. That was $3,876 a month I'd have to pay for the mortgage. But when the banks look at how much you can borrow when they're building a portfolio, they add a buffer on top of that. And most of the banks are adding 3% buffer on top, some slightly less at the moment, but a lot of them will add 3% on top. So they assess your position at 8.95 generally over a 30-year period of time. So that means they're assessing your ability to borrow at $5,206. That's what you're not paying that, but that's what the banks use as a buffer to make sure you can afford to make that repayment on that house of $5,206.
Just for people listening, $5,206 per month in repayments that they're expecting or wanting to see in your financial position.
That's right, that you can afford that. Yeah, in case interest rates go up, they want to see you can afford $5,206 on this average house in this suburb. Now, whereas the rent for the property is $500 a week, which is $2,165, but the banks don't put a buffer on how much rent you can pay. So they just take whatever the rent is that you're paying, and then so you can see straight away there's a bit of a difference. If you're renting the average house in the area, you're paying, well, you need to have $2,165, but if you're owning the average house in the area, you've got to show you've got $5,206. So financially, there's quite a bit of a difference there that you've got to have between ownership.
More than double.
Yeah, that's right. And that changes obviously depending on what suburb you're doing this in. Then we have a look at the maths. So on borrowing capacity for this particular example, what we found is because there's this disparity between a mortgage and how they assess renting, that you're actually sacrificing borrowing potential of $398,112, which is a significant amount of money in borrowing potential that you're giving up. So here we're not talking about lifestyle benefits. We're purely looking at mathematics of it and what you could do if you weren't owning your own home, which is, you could easily afford to, get a rental property. So
I'd just like to pause that there as well, Stephen, while we talk about that. $3,908,000. Now that's close to $400,000. So we round that up an extra $2,000, or you just chuck an extra $2,000 in. You can buy a $400,000 property, and doesn't need to be in a fancy suburb. I bought a $400,000 property before, and it has grown in $150,000 in value over the last couple of years. So by me not going and buying a home, potentially, I've made an extra $150,000 over a few years just because of this figure that I can lend at, that borrowing capacity. And that's just an example. It might not be the same for every single person, but you can see that when you understand your borrowing capacity and you can put that to work for you versus you working for your money, you can have these other things acquire you wealth without you having to, really slog for it.
And that's just an immediate benefit. It actually compounds the benefit over time, because when you're owning the rental property, there's a lot less money that's going to go out of your pocket to keep it going compared to a home, because you're not beautifying it as much as your home. You're not adding extensions to it. You're spending a lot less money on a rental property than you do on your own home. Definitely over a 10-year period of time. So the benefits just continue to grow over time. So we'll have a look at the next page. And so here's an example in Brighton. So this is the area that I moved into in Melbourne. So what you can see here, so this is obviously an upmarket area, and every state has, and towns have the upmarket areas. So an average house in Brighton recently was about $3.4 million, so very expensive. The mortgage I've got here $2 million. Repayments on a $2 million mortgage are $10,420 per month. But when you add the bank's buffer, when they're working out how much you can afford, you actually have to factor in 14,314 a month. And look, there are plenty of people who are doing this. So it's not pie in the sky sort of stuff. But the median rental in Brighton was $11.50 per week for an average 3-bedroom house. And here's an example there. Actually, quite a nice looking house, a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-garage house, $11.50 per week. So these are real figures, real properties. You can see above that the Brighton house snapshot. The 3-bedroom medium in Brighton's $11.50. So these are real figures that you can easily rent. Well, not always easily, but you can find a property for that sort of numbers there.
I'll jump in.
Can we have a look at the?
If that's all right, Stephen. I definitely see, like, once you get over $1,000 a week in rental, your value for money is pretty phenomenal. Like the disparity, like the yields from like a $2 million home, sits around that 2 to 3%. And when you go higher, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, it gets lower and lower. So it will get to a stage through this rentvesting strategy where it doesn't make any logical sense to purchase that property if it's a few $1 million, pretty much anywhere in Australia at this stage. And the money you can get for something like this, it's quite a significant house. Like I know through project management, past life, the maintenance on those multi-million-dollar large-scale properties is quite significant too. So, huge. Just keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it's really, once you get your head around it, and I don't think a lot of people get their head around the fact they could actually live in a really good area, in a really good house, for significantly less than what their mortgage would be, which we'll have a look here. So looking at this, so the mortgage repayment for servicing the loan on this property will be $14,314, but the rent in the area is only $4,980. And I haven't rubberized these figures; these are real figures. And I actually rented for less in this suburb, but I rented quite a while ago. But the figures weren't that far off. So you can see here, by owning, you are sacrificing borrowing potential by $1,051,813.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing. You could, I'm sure you guys could talk about what you could afford to buy for $1 million. It might be more than one property in different areas and all sorts of things. So you
Absolutely. Or you could go buy a commercial property for that borrowing capacity.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like Sam was saying, you can see there's a house I put down the bottom there in Montrose Avenue, Brighton. Purchase price $2.5 million. Yield was only 1.76, like Sam's saying. So as you're going up, the yields are going down. So it makes sense to be a renter there, potentially not an owner of that property.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Stephen. It definitely compounds as you go up. The more lavish you want your lifestyle to be, to have this, I own this dream home in this area. You can see how it can be really good for your ego, in terms of how the community might view you, although it can be very detrimental to your financial position.
I see a big benefit too also of renting is that a lot of people, like Sam, you mentioned earlier about education, that for a lot of Australians, education is one of the things they can really pass on to their kids to try and give them a good start. And, you teach them and then they go and do it themselves. That you could actually then rent in a good school zone. So maybe instead of paying, $30,000 to $40,000 a year for a private school, starting out in year 4 or something like that, that you could go and rent in an area where there's a really good public school and they can go to public school. So you're renting in a nice area with your lifestyle, and now your kids are going to a really good school, but you don't have to spend the $1 million plus to buy there. You're renting, and you're getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's one of my properties. It's in a really strong school zone. It rents really, really well, and it's also grown really well too. So it's a win-win. Another thing that I because I have these conversations a lot, there's no real calculators or anything like that that's out there to help sort of paint the picture, and rightfully so, because like I always preface this with, it's not financial advice on that front, but I did run a couple of models, which I thought would be interesting for people to understand, and also for my own benefit to sort of break down. And like, I'll give you a couple of sort of figures to try and help paint the picture that I'm running, because I had a client situation where they had $750,000 as a purchasing capacity, and they were trying to weigh this up, whether it was, do we own or occupy, or do we, rent vest, because they knew that 750 wasn't going to be their forever home. They hadn't had kids yet. They weren't sure where they wanted to live, and it was pretty, after doing the exercise, it was pretty obvious that the rent vesting strategy was definitely the way to go. But what blew me away was just running the figures on it, in that the rent vesting strategy, just from choosing one property alone, it far outweighs it, and it goes up to 11 years, even taking into account if you were buying a rental property and selling it and paying the capital gains tax. Financially, it actually stacks up for the first 11 years to be net cash flow beneficial to go down that strategy. And I didn't model out that because of the increased cash flow through the rent vesting strategy, they could have bought a second property, which would have even further, supercharged it in that sense. So if you are thinking about it, obviously just reach out to us and have a bit of a chat. I can run some sort of hypothetical figures for you, but it just gets down to it that, with that rent vesting strategy, you're getting income from day one. So that's probably the biggest key. And also 9 times out of 10 or 99% of the time, like the place that you'd look to purchase, it may not be in that growth location that's going to achieve higher rates of capital growth prospects. Yeah. So even looking at that, there's a lot of numbers and things to consider through this whole journey of yours. But it's just, as Jared and I always say, it's like, you need to know the right questions to ask to get the outcome you're looking for. So we're trying to empower people, Stephen, through talking with people like you and, going through that Loans Australia process to sort of see what their borrowing capacity is, and then, having these, open, transparent conversations to say, well, what's your big goal and what are you trying to achieve? Because, the dream of, buying your own occupier, it's fantastic. It fills that cup in a certain way, but what is your bigger goal? Think more longer than that, 2, 3, 5 year. Like, where do you see yourself 10, 20 years, and then start making your way backwards? Because the way that the world for me is set up is to keep you in that hamster wheel, and a lot of the time we're seeing owner occupiers actually being slaves to their mortgage, and they're not fulfilling their own desires around what do you want to do for work, for a vocation? How do you want to live that life? Because, we get shackled by our possessions. My dad tells me we are a slave to our possessions, and it's stuck with me for a number of years. And a home that you live in, it is a possession. You got to maintain it. You would like to upkeep it. You got that dopamine hit, and then the more financial savvy you get, you start to realize that it may not be the right answer for you. So
just on that
I just want to jump in quickly.
Yeah, you go.
Sam, I obviously growing up with your dad as well. He's got some amazingly wise quotes around do your possessions own you, or do you own your possessions? But there's one thing that I want to mention before I have a question for you, Stephen, on a strategy for people, depending on what age you are, is that we haven't talked about the psychological benefits of being a rent investor and being financially independent, because this is a delayed gratification, and I would argue, I don't know because I haven't experienced the psychological benefits of buying a really beautiful home and then creating a family. I don't know that part of it, but on my side of the coin, I guess, the psychological benefits of being, and I'm not a super duper wealthy, mega rich guy, but I'm pretty financially independent, and the psychological benefits of that is amazing. And I think it should be aspirational for people, because you can have both. You can have those psychological benefits of being financially independent and owning your dream home. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other if you do have that delayed gratification of, let's do a little bit of rent vesting or investing in a way that can get us financial enough to, what you've done, Stephen, is buy a home and then continue building your wealth at the same time. And that is such a great story that you shared. I'm really grateful that you did bring that up. How can people start to or what should people start to do when they realize, like, okay, maybe rent vesting is a good thing for me?
Yep.
What are
So
the next
just
steps?
a couple of things. Just one thing I just want to mention before answering that question is that one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is not only buying their own home first, but what they buy, because people can only afford a certain amount, and the area where they grew up might not be the best area, say capital growth wise. And besides a lifestyle benefit, as I said, the biggest benefit of owning your own home is there's no capital gains tax. But just imagine if you bought a home in an area which only grew, 2% a year. There's plenty of areas in especially outer metro areas of the major cities where the growth is just not there. They're all greenfield sites. There's this new home after new home going up, and the growth is really low for a long period of time. And so you're not getting any benefit of all of any growth. And so if you finally have to sell or you need to sell, you're not making any money at all. Whereas the best benefit one of the biggest benefits of rent vesting is that you can buy anywhere. So with using people like yourselves who are researching the whole market, you can use that capital much more wisely, because now it's not an emotional decision. It's a dollars and cents decision. So they can buy a property probably for a lot less than what they would have paid on a home, but they're buying in areas which are going to grow, which have infrastructure, which have all the good stuff that you want for growth. So now that it's a very different buying decision. It's a smart wealth decision. I find people make much better decisions when it's not emotional, when they're just looking at, what's this property going to do for me? Is it a property where I can renovate and add value? Is it an area that's going to grow? All these sort of things. And people I find can make a lot more money. Like you said, you bought a little rental property for 400. A couple of years later, you've already made 150,000. That's a dream for people if they could do something like that. And it just means they can get ahead so much faster than what they could have owning their own home, because you're not going to, on your own home, it's a slower journey. It's a different sort of journey for most people. And people are really reluctant, a lot of people psychologically, to go to their own home, pull equity out and start doing investments. So it's people's minds sort of slowly changing, but they're really worried about, I've got all this debt on my own home. They're not thinking that there's the old Kiyosaki, good debt, bad debt. And psychologically, they don't really want debt on their own home, which makes it, again, a very slow way to building wealth. So you can't save your way to wealth. You got to leverage your way to wealth. And people need to understand that it's a very slow way. If you're putting your $5 out of your pay packet every week to save, you're not going to get there. You've got to borrow. You got to borrow smart. You got to buy smart and make these good decisions. In terms of what people should do if they're starting out in the journey, I don't think anyone's got a decision. And I've got lots of young professionals earning a lot of money, and for most of them, they can't even afford where they want to live. But we had a young couple buy in a Melbourne suburb. They bought for $1.8 million their first home. And they're borrowing because they're professionals. They borrowed 90% of it. They've got this massive mortgage on this okay property in a good area that they just want to knuckle down and try and pay for. But their lifestyle is not going to be phenomenal. If one of them, God forbid, loses their job, or let's say, they want to have a baby, which they say they don't want to, but things happen, how they're going to afford that property in a few years' time is going to be interesting to see. But hell bent, no matter what you said to them, that was their decision. They wanted that property, and that's their parents. They gave them some money to get into it, and that was the conditioning they had. But I think for people coming through now who can afford a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 property, I think the benefits of renting, having a rental over owning your own home is phenomenal. That you can buy a much better property growth-wise. You've got all of Australia as your oyster instead of one or two suburbs you're looking at to live in. That means you can be a mobile workforce. You can work anywhere. A lot of people are working from home now, so it doesn't matter where you work. So maybe you could rent in a different area, because you don't need to be next to the city, depending on where you want to work. So instead of paying $700 a week rent, maybe you can rent for $400 somewhere else and save all that extra money. It's much more flexible decisions you can make if you're a renter, instead of having to own your own home and stuck in that property. And psychologically, like you said, Jared, and you bring that up a lot, and I think it's an under talked about area, the psychological impacts of your lifestyle and how much it costs to live. And imagine the pressure off you if you don't have this massive mortgage over your shoulders. The pressure's a lot off, because you've got a little bit more money. You're seeing your wealth build. and you're not emotionally linked to the wealth because you don't care about that rental property. It's just a money machine for you. It's not somewhere where you have to live every day. You're not seeing it every day. You might not ever see it. Like some properties I own, I've never seen, and I don't want to see them. I just want the money to come in, and any problem that comes up, I want the manager to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. I've bought a few and I haven't seen them, and it's not a thing. Now it's crazy that I think most people's dreams are freedom, and like at the end of the day, but using these different things to get to it, like freedom of like eventually I want to own my own house outright and do that sort of stuff. But the actions they're taking towards trying to get to freedom aren't actually going to lead them there.
No.
Versus like if you were to like say, even if you had $300,000 or $350 or borrowing capacity of $350, $300, you could go buy something that could go away and you could put it to work for you, and you can use that leverage in a way that is leveraging you wealth faster than what some other people are using leverage in terms of like these $1.8 million homes. Sam would probably have the argument of like, well, the growth rate in that area, because not too many people are buying and selling $1.8 million homes, there's not that much market volatility and people buying and selling. So the growth rate for those types of deals are not going to go as high as maybe something that what people can actually afford, the $350,000 to $550,000 range, which is in those higher growth locations. And then you've actually got that leveraging you better than, like you said, good debt versus bad debt, Stephen. So it's just one little stepping stone, I guess. It's just people reaching out and saying, hey, what sort of borrowing capacity do I have? And what's the best route to go? And you can make that equation each time that you go on your, maybe if you buy a second property or your third property or you buy a fourth property, is it like, when is the right time for me financially to buy a property that is a home that it can allow me to continually build my wealth even once I bought that home? Because that's going to give you the psychological benefits as a bonus for owning a home, or technically owning a home, even the bank owns most of it, and also the psychological benefits of being more financially free and having what you said, freedom, Stephen, is that freedom to be able to make those decisions in your life. So you have both those things versus like, let's go buy something that's $1.8 million and we're just trapped and we it looks like we're living the dream. We deep down they're probably feeling like, well, we're pretty trapped here.
Well, on Saturday night, instead of going out for dinner, they're eating baked beans at home. So they make money. And that happens a lot. But just imagine that, okay, you're stuck in a suburban house. You know, you're one amongst 100 houses. They all look the same. Everyone's doing the grind. And you're paying your mortgage off. Oh, I own my own home. It's fantastic. And then you got the guy, down at the beach in a little unit near the beach, paying a third of what you are, who walks out every morning, has a stroll on the beach before they go to work, or when they get home, they take the dog out, walk along the beach, and doesn't own the property, but has this great lifestyle. They don't need to live near the city or in the birds because they work from home, or they only have to go in once a week, so they're happy to do a commute once a week, and the rest they're at home. The internet's fine, but they got the local cafe where they know them by name. They've got this beautiful lifestyle that people can really make these decisions now, and that maybe they don't think about. Maybe they are. That you don't have to live in the burbs. You can live in the location where maybe your hobbies are. So if you're a hiker or something, why not live near the mountains? Why don't you, instead of having to drive on the weekends a mile away, live near where you want to do your hobbies. Make sure you've got internet. In Melbourne, that's a bit of a problem sometimes, where you are. Great. But you can make these. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can rent in a lower area near your hobbies, and then start buying properties. And all of a sudden, 10 to 20 years later, you've accumulated 3, 4, 5 properties all over the place, which have probably all doubled in value. And you've had a lifestyle as well. So you can have both. You don't have to sacrifice. But if you buy your own home and maximize your borrowing capacity from day one, you're not going to have that. You're not going to be able to afford it.
Yeah, I'd say this shift's also just like with the advancement of technology, it has supercharged this whole thing. Like, I can buy properties anywhere in Australia, get video walkthroughs, have connections and relationships with people on the ground. You can fly there for $200 and have a look through. It has shifted, and also with the internet, like, it's a different game that you're playing now. So, like, don't listen to, don't get too caught up in your parents and your grandparents and what they did. Like, even with what Jared does with businesses, online businesses, like the world is evolving, so evolve with it. And I guess education is key to start with, but then it's taking action as well at the end of the day.
But back when the parents got their home, it only cost them around 3 times their income to pay for it. Now it's around 10, 11 times people's income to pay their mortgage. So it's a very different, and parents don't understand that. It's much more expensive to live relatively to their income now than it was in the 70s or 80s and 90s. It's a different proposition. And the workforce is much, like you said, it's much easier to work from home or have a lifestyle where you don't have to be in an office, all the time.
I'd like to just give people an example of what you said there, Stephen. So say the average wage was like $40,000 back, for our parents per year, and it was 3 times their annual income to buy a home. It's 120 grand, right? Now say the average, just say for example, round figures, it's $100,000 average wage. Might not be, might be, but say it is, and it's 11 times. That means it's $1.1 million to buy a home versus $120,000. 11 times it's huge. So I think we could keep banging on about the pros and cons about this, but I think we've really highlighted some of the most important cases here. So I'm so grateful that you came on, Steve.
I got one last to throw in the mix. Right. Is the classic, my rent goes up, and I'm going to tell you, my interest rates went up and my insurance goes up. But as Stephen said at the start, the government and the tenant also helps me pay that down. So with rental increases, you can pass, the $50 rental increase on your property that you're renting. Chances are, especially if you're buying well in growth locations, you can also increase that rent or your rent property by $50 and, leverage it that way. So that's a common argument that I do get, and just wanted to throw that one out there as well.
I encourage, if you're going to do the rent vesting, is to try and sign long-term leases. That works way better, gives you a bit more security, because yes, downsides are you don't have control over the property. They could decide to move back in. They could decide not to renew the lease. There are risks obviously in doing that, but so the way to minimise that risk is sign longer-term leases, and then it's like your home anyway. If you sign a 4-year lease, it's a fair amount of time, and generally when you do that, the vendors accept lower rent increases when you do that. And I certainly found that. And we had for years, I think 3 or 4 years, there was no rent increase. We had none in Brighton, which is just amazing. Nice old tenant. You got to find the right vendors. But but if you sign these long-term leases, that takes all of that stress away as well.
Yeah, my sister, I think you mentioned that to my sister, Sam, which they went and did, signed a longer-term lease without a property manager for the property that she's living in because they're having a family, and now she gets to do things in the property that she previously wouldn't have thought or been able to do because she's got much more security there. And for the landlord, he's stoked as well. So I love that you brought that up, Stephen. And also, Sam, with the interest rates, if the interest rates are going up, they're going up for renters and they're going up for landlords.
Yeah, that's right. It's not exclusive just for renters. Exactly. The homeowners get the increase too.
Yeah. Stephen, where can we send people? loansaustralia.com.au to
that's an easy way to go there. And look, we're happy to help anyone. We love helping rent investors and grow, and our expertise is in helping people maximise their borrowing capacity and building their wealth through property. But obviously we just focus on the finance strategy side of things.
Love it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. You're a wealth of knowledge, mate. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
All the best. See you guys.